This case exploded again because of Netflix. But before it was a documentary, before the reaction videos, before strangers started arguing about it online, it was a car. A Toyota Camry. A brick building. A road in Strongsville, Ohio. And two young men who never came home. Dominic Russo was 20. Davion Flanagan was 19. Mackenzie Shirilla was 17 when the crash happened. She survived. They did not. At first, many people thought it was a horrific accident. A young driver. A violent impact. A tragedy no one could undo. Then investigators looked closer. And by the time the case reached court, prosecutors were not calling it an accident anymore. They were calling it intentional. They said Mackenzie drove into that building on purpose. And the judge agreed. This is the case behind the crash, the Netflix documentary that brought Mackenzie Shirilla back into the spotlight. But the real question is not only what happened on that road. The question is what happens when a real tragedy becomes content. Because two people died. And years later, the person convicted of killing them became the face everyone was talking about. The crash happened in the early morning hours of July 31, 2022. Mackenzie was driving with Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan in the car. According to prosecutors and evidence presented in court, the vehicle reached around 100 miles per hour before slamming into a brick building. Dominic and Davion died at the scene. Mackenzie was badly injured, but she lived. And that survival became the beginning of a very different story. In many fatal crashes, the question is simple. Why did the driver lose control? But here, investigators eventually asked something darker. What if she did not lose control? What if the car went exactly where she meant it to go? That was the heart of the prosecution's case. They argued that Mackenzie deliberately drove into the building because of her relationship with Dominic, and because she did not want that relationship to end. The defense and Mackenzie's family have continued to dispute that. They have said the crash was not intentional, and that she may have suffered a medical episode or blackout. That distinction matters. This is not just internet speculation. This is a case with a court record, a conviction, an appeal history, and families who still see the story very differently. In August 2023, after a bench trial, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo found Mackenzie Shirilla guilty on multiple charges, including murder, felonious assault, aggravated vehicular homicide, drug possession, and possessing criminal tools. The judge described her actions as calculated. Mackenzie was sentenced to life in prison, with parole eligibility after 15 years. That could have been where the public story ended. A conviction. A sentence. Two grieving families. But true crime rarely ends in court anymore. Sometimes court is only where the second version begins. Years later, the crash arrived on Netflix. The documentary brought the case to a much larger audience, using surveillance material, body cam footage, courtroom footage, interviews, and prison access to reconstruct the story for viewers who may never have heard the names Dominic Russo or Davion Flanagan before. And suddenly, the case became new again. New viewers discovered it. New arguments started. New edits appeared online. Some focused on Mackenzie. Some focused on whether the documentary changed anything. And some families of the victims felt the attention was drifting in the wrong direction. Because when a case becomes a documentary, there is always a risk. The convicted person becomes the character. The tragedy becomes the plot. And the audience begins asking questions that can feel unbearable to the people who lost someone. Was the sentence too harsh? Does she deserve sympathy? Could she become famous? That last question is what makes this case feel so modern. You do not need a book contract. You do not even need freedom. Sometimes all you need is attention. A face people recognize. A documentary thumbnail. A viral clip. A group of strangers who decide they know the case better than the court did. And that is where the crash becomes bigger than the crash. If you are still watching, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to Listen in the Dark for more true stories, dark cases, and mysteries that make you think. Because this case is not only about one fatal morning in Ohio. It is also about what we choose to reward with our attention. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were not side characters. They were young men with families, futures, memories, and people who loved them. They were passengers in that car. They had no control over the wheel. And when the public talks about this case only through Mackenzie, something important disappears. The two people who died become details inside someone else's story. That is why some victim relatives have pushed back so strongly after the documentary. They do not want the internet to turn the convicted person into a celebrity while Dominic and Davion become photographs in the background. Whether someone agrees with every criticism or not, the fear is understandable. It can expose injustice. It can keep forgotten cases alive. It can make the public care. But it can also do the opposite. It can flatten grief into entertainment. It can turn criminals into brands. It can create fans where there should be accountability. And it can make the person who caused the damage more famous than the people who were lost. But sometimes the algorithm rewards something else. Not the families. Not the filmmakers. Not the prosecutors. Not the person at the center of it. The case becomes something people consume. And consumption does not always look like compassion. Did Mackenzie Shirilla intentionally crash the car? The judge said yes. Online, the question becomes emotional. But beneath all those questions are two names that should never be pushed aside. Dominic Russo. Davion Flanagan. Two young men died in a car they did not drive. And every retelling should remember that first. A documentary is not a trial. A reaction video is not an appeal. And sympathy is not evidence. The legal case against Mackenzie Shirilla was decided in court. Her family continues to say the crash was not intentional. The victims' families continue to live with the outcome. And the public is watching again. The consequences will last lifetimes. But the internet found a way to make the story start over. And every time it starts over, someone gets attention. The question is who? Is it Dominic? Is it Davion? Is it the people still grieving them? Or is it Mackenzie? If the answer is Mackenzie, then maybe the victims' families are right to be afraid. Maybe true crime has become too good at turning convicted killers into main characters. Maybe we have to ask whether our curiosity is helping anyone. Or whether we are feeding the same machine we claim to criticize. It has everything the internet reacts to. But maybe the simplest version is still the most important. On July 31, 2022, Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan got into a car. They never got out alive. A court later found that Mackenzie Shirilla intentionally drove that car into a building. She is now in prison. A documentary brought the case back into public view. And the internet is deciding what kind of story it wants this to be. A story about a controversial documentary. A story about a young woman asking to be seen differently. Or a story about two lives that should not be pushed to the edge of the frame. And if we put the wrong person at the center long enough, we should not be surprised when fame follows. So before this becomes just another trending documentary, remember the names that matter most. Dominic Russo. Davion Flanagan. They are not the twist. They are not the setup. They are not the reason the story became famous. They are the reason the story exists. And if true crime cannot remember that, maybe the problem is not only the people making the documentaries. Maybe it is also us. If this story made you think, do not forget to like the video and subscribe to Listen in the Dark for more true stories, real mysteries, and dark cases told with the victims, the facts, and the unanswered questions in mind. Turn off the lights. Keep listening. And never forget who paid the real price.